All right, well, good morning. My name is Christi Clark, and I'm the Executive Director at Insight Memory Care Center. Has anybody here ever heard about Insight Memory Care Center? No? One person. Well, I'm glad that I am here today. I'm actually, I guess I am filling in for another speaker that wasn't able to be here today. So I was so pleased that I was able to come in their place. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what Insight Memory Care Center is, all of the programs that we provide to support the community, and then we'll talk a little bit, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about memory loss and certainly about the different types of dementia. So we know that there is certainly a need in our community. There are 46.8 million people worldwide living with a diagnosis of some type of dementia. In America alone, there are 5.4 million Americans, and in Northern Virginia, there's over 42,000 individuals living with a diagnosis of dementia, and over 150,000 unpaid caregivers. And so we know that this number is going to double every 20 years. And when we think about the impact this has, especially due to the fact that the number one cause of dementia is really aging. So 1 in 9 people aged 65 and over have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. It's the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. And it is the only cause of death that currently there is no cure for. All of the medications that we use for individuals with dementia are really just used to help us manage the symptoms. So the number of older individuals certainly in Northern Virginia is increasing, and it will increase by 76% by the year 2030. So Insight Memory Care Center was established in 1984 by Lynn Noyes Simon with 3 participants. Actually in the basement of a church, and it originally began as a partnership with the Alzheimer's Association. During one of their support groups, the families really felt that they needed a break from their loved one with dementia. And so we established Insight Memory Care Center, and at the time it was called the Family Respite Center. We've gone through a couple of name changes over the years. And today, Insight is still the only dementia-specific daycare center in the Northern Virginia area, and the only adult day center in the Washington, D.C. area that cares for individuals from a very early stage, from the time that they receive a diagnosis, all the way through the end of life. So our mission at Insight is really to provide specialized care, support, and education for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and other memory impairments, their families, their caregivers, and the community through our Adult Day Health and Resource Center. And really our vision is a community where those affected by Alzheimer's disease and other memory impairments can achieve the highest quality of life. So as I mentioned, in 1984, we were established as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. In 2004, we outgrew the space in the basement of that church in McLean, and we moved to a space in an Old Lee Highway, and it was about 5,000 square feet of space. In 2014, we changed our name from the Alzheimer's. It went from the Family Respite Center to the Alzheimer's Family Day Center. And in 2014, we changed our name because we wanted people to understand that we cared for individuals with all types of dementia, not just those with Alzheimer's disease. And we also wanted to make sure that people were aware that not only did we care for the individual living with the disease, but we also provided a lot of support and education for the families, because oftentimes it's the families that are more affected by this disease than the individual in terms of the toll it takes on us. So in 2015, we outgrew our space at Old Lee Highway, and we moved to our current location on Pender Drive in Fairfax, and we have 15,000 square feet of space. We have 2 buildings. We have our main adult day center where our participants come Monday through Friday from 7:30 to 5:30. And then we also have a separate education and support center where we also hold our early stage program called Reconnections 4 days a week. So when we think about the programs that we offer, we kind of break them into the care, the education, and the support. So our early stage programs, we have a number of early stage programs. We have a mind and body workshop, which is a couples program. And one of the things that happens, especially for spouses, as we receive a diagnosis of dementia, oftentimes our friends aren't quite sure how to handle that, and maybe there's some behaviors that they're not quite sure how to manage. And so oftentimes their friends sort of drop away. And this gives them an opportunity to engage in an activity as a couple in a safe, supportive environment. We also have a support group portion of this program. And then at the end, they come together for dinner, which helps them increase their socialization. You know, for anybody living with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia, it's so important that we keep them social and engaged, which is one of the reasons that we put together an early stage program called Reconnections. We started with 1 day a week, and now it's up to 4 days, where individuals with a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, and mild cognitive impairment is a little bit different than an actual diagnosis of dementia in that people with mild cognitive impairment have an impairment in one area of cognition. It could be memory, it could be executive functioning, it could be reasoning, it could be attention, but it's not interfering with their daily life. So individuals with mild cognitive impairment or early dementia can come to our early stage program, and really what we found is that it's a way for them, again, to remain social, to create new friendships, to be able to have cognitive engagement therapy, opportunities for creative expression, physical activity, reflection. What does this disease mean to them? They have an opportunity for peer support. Oftentimes we really look at the caregivers, but we don't necessarily ask the individual living with the disease how they're feeling and what this is doing to them as a person. We also have a program called our SHARE program, which is an individual counseling session with either myself or Lindsay, who is our Director of Education and Outreach. So what we do is we actually go to either to the individual's home, or they can come to Insight, and we sit down with them for typically between 1.5 to 2 hours each session to really get an idea of what that individual living with dementia wants, and we help them create a plan of care for the future. So what does that look like? So oftentimes as caregivers, people will ask us, is there something that I can do for you? And oftentimes as caregivers, we're not really sure what we can have them do, or we think we can do it all ourselves. But the goal is, how do we create that support system early on, so when it's time that your loved one actually needs support, they're a little bit more willing to let somebody maybe come into the house, or somebody come in so you can go get your hair done once a week. So this has been a really impactful program, not only for the individual living with disease and their care partner, which oftentimes is their spouse, but it could also be their adult child or a friend. It really creates this open communication of what happens if I'm no longer safe in my own home. I mean, oftentimes we want to keep our loved ones in their own home for as long as possible. But oftentimes with a diagnosis of dementia, oftentimes it's not possible because of maybe behavioral issues, oftentimes the stress on the caregiver. They can no longer take care of the individual with dementia. We know that 40% of caregivers often die before the individual with dementia just because there is so much stress on that caregiver having to do everything plus take care of their loved one. So our care is really our mid to late stage in our main adult day health center, where we provide a safe, engaging therapeutic environment. And our goal is really to provide a person-centered approach to this care. So we want to know what that individual did prior to having a diagnosis of dementia, and what are their interests now with the disease? Because we know at times with a diagnosis of dementia, their personalities can change. And oftentimes families will say, well, my husband would never dance. Well, now with his disease, maybe he's a little bit more open and he loves to dance and he loves the music programs that we provide. So we do have music therapy, we have dance therapy, we have exercise programs that come in, and our most recent addition is we have a new puppy to provide pet therapy. We have a 7-month-old Newfoundland, which is why I'm always wearing this vest, because I always have treats in my pocket since we're trying to train him. So he really has been a wonderful addition to our program. So we do have I think what makes us unique from other adult day centers, and there are 4 Fairfax County adult day centers that do provide similar programming, but they are not dementia specific. Our staffing ratio is 1 to 5. In our blue program, 1 to 4 in our orange program as people's disease progresses. In our late stage program, the staffing ratio is 1 to 3. And so we really can provide with our staffing ratio the ability to care for individuals that might have some behaviors or maybe need a little bit more one-on-one attention. We do have a multilingual staff that's really trained in dementia care. We do a lot of trainings with our staff because we want them to really understand how do we care and communicate with somebody with memory impairment. We have health monitoring and medication management. We have 2 nurses. We have social workers. They will receive assistance with personal care as the disease progresses and somebody might need to be fed. Or if we need to have 2 people to help them into the restroom or to transfer, we're able to do that in our environment. We do receive all of our meals from the Congregate meal program through Fairfax County. So if you are a Fairfax resident, you don't have to pay for meals when you come to our center. So we do offer breakfast and lunch and 2 snacks every day. And we do have a 3-year license from the Virginia Department of Social Services. And this slide says the last 6 annual visits were deficiency free. So we're very, very proud of that. So when the state inspector comes in, they're really very pleased with the program that we are providing. And they actually just came in. And so now we can say it's 7 years deficiency free. So we're very excited about that. The next couple of slides are just about what people are saying about us through our annual report. We do send out an annual caregiver survey every year to get a feel for what our caregivers are saying about the care that we are providing. So we know that caregiving is stressful. So we were part of the Penn State University's Daily Stress and Health of Caregivers study. It's called the DASH study, where we really looked at on the days where an individual with dementia came to an adult day program, were their stress hormones decreased? And so we're really excited that we can say that yes, on the days that they came to an adult day center, the program was certainly beneficial, and their hormone levels certainly were increased. So we know that we're making a difference. There's also another study called the Finnish Geriatric Intervention Study, which really looks at what makes the most sense in terms of what can we do to possibly sort of stave off a diagnosis of dementia. So healthy eating, regular exercise, brain training activities, learning something new is really important if we're looking at how do we enhance our memory? How do we build up that cognitive reserve so if we develop a diagnosis of dementia, maybe we can stave off those symptoms for a number of years. So this is just a slide about our center, which I think is great in that it's an open floor plan, so our participants have a lot of availability to walk in sort of a square, so there are no dead ends, so there's a continuous walking pattern if they're not involved in all of our programming that we have. So the other aspect of our program is our education. So we offer classes for family caregivers the third Wednesday of every month. We also offer 2 boot camps a year, and so on April 6th is our next all-day caregiver boot camp. All of our education and support groups are free, so you don't ever have to join a paid program at our center in order to take advantage of all of the education and support that we offer. So at our boot camp on April the 6th, we are going to have one of the nurse practitioners from Georgetown University. She's going to be talking about, what is dementia and what are the current research trials that are available. We will have somebody talking about veterans benefits, if there are any veterans. We will be talking about how do you help somebody with their activities of daily living? How do we transfer somebody from a wheelchair onto the commode? Or how do we transfer somebody from a wheelchair onto the bed without hurting ourselves? We'll also be having what's called person-centered care, which our Director of Recreation will talk a little bit about some of our programs. So she'll be talking about our multisensory environment, which is really important. As the disease progresses, oftentimes individuals have less opportunities to interact with their environment, and this gives us a way to help them regain some of that sensory stimulation. She's going to talk about our music and memory program, which is a program where we give each of our participants their own individual iPod, which has music that they like. So oftentimes it's music from their teen years or their early 20s. And what's great about the iPod is it doesn't matter what language you speak. We can put whatever language, we can put music on your iPod in whatever language is your native language, which is good because oftentimes for people with dementia, if they speak multiple languages, as their disease progresses, they will oftentimes revert back to speaking their native language. We certainly offer a lot of community trainings. So not only do we do just like this training, just an overview of what we offer at Insight, but we do a lot of trainings. I think one of our most popular ones, it's a training called Normal Aging versus Dementia. As we age, we have a harder time coming up with names. Anybody in the room have a harder time coming up with names besides me? But dementia is not a normal part of aging. So what's normal and what's not? And what are those 10 warning signs to look for if we're concerned that we have a diagnosis or we might have a memory impairment? And I think what's interesting is when we look at these 10 warning signs, most individuals with Alzheimer's disease don't recognize that there's an impairment in themselves. Oftentimes it's somebody else recognizing the warning signs in another person. We also have what's called Caregiving at a Glance, and we're very excited that we just finished the 5th edition of this book. And basically, it's a fingertip guide for caregivers. So if you are having a hard time figuring out what medications should I be giving and what are the contraindications, you can look at the medication sheet. If you're having a difficult time taking away the car keys or getting your loved one to keep from wandering, there's a little blurb about that, or activities. And so we're really excited that this is going to be coming out. This is a guide that is free to caregivers. Again, you don't ever have to come to our program in order to receive one of these guides. And then the last part of what we do is really our support programs. We have 5 separate support groups. We have some dementia specific support groups. So we have one of the only Lewy body dementia support groups in the state of Virginia. We have one of the only frontal temporal degeneration support groups in the state of Virginia. We also have a support group for individuals living with a diagnosis out in the community. Again, even if you don't ever come to one of our early stage programs, you can always come to that support group so you can meet people and have an opportunity to talk to somebody about what's going on and know that you're not in this alone. We do also offer consultations. We know that every situation is unique. Even though there is a similar path of progression, I mean, every individual brings their own unique experiences to the journey, and we want to make sure that we're meeting with families, again, free of charge. You don't ever have to come to Insight to be able to call us and say, you know, Christi, can I just sit down with you? My mom's just been diagnosed with a diagnosis of dementia, and I'm not really sure what to do. Or I'm looking for an assisted living community, and can you give me a sense of what I should be doing? And so we do offer those free consultations. We also have partnered with the Alzheimer's Foundation of America to offer free memory screenings. So anybody that might be concerned about their memory, they can come to Insight for a free screening, and we use a tool called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. And that assessment really looks at different areas of cognition. So there are specific sort of questions that look at executive functioning, language, memory, verbal fluency. So I think it's really important, and oftentimes neurologists will use that to help determine what type of dementia somebody has. And oftentimes it's easier for a family member to come to us versus trying to convince a loved one to go to a doctor, because nobody wants to go to the doctor, so they can bring them to us. And our job, we're not physicians, our job is not to give them a diagnosis. Our job is to help them understand what might be going on. And so what we look at is, could it be something that's affecting their memory? Could it be depression? Could it be stress if they're already a caregiver? Could it be a thyroid problem? Could it be a vitamin D deficiency? And so we're looking at a lot of different things to be able to say, maybe you should go to your primary care physician and just rule out that it's not something else. And so the memory screenings, I will be back here, I believe the date is April 27th for one of your community health days, and I will be doing free memory screenings. So if you or anybody you know would just like to sort of have a baseline of where their memory is, I will be here giving those free memory screenings on that day. We also offer 2 different memory cafes. And a memory cafe is really an opportunity for caregivers, again, to find the support and the connection where they can really engage in an activity with their loved one living with dementia in a safe, supportive environment. And so we offer a structured program, and then we offer a meal. So we either offer dinner or lunch, depending on what time of day those memory cafes are. The memory cafes, again, are all free. Anybody can come to our memory cafes. And then one of my favorite programs that I began, this year will be our 5th Caregiver cruise. And so it gives me an opportunity to go on a cruise every year. And the idea came from our Mind and Body workshop, where the couples were saying, we still want to travel, but it's getting more and more difficult to travel with my loved one with dementia, because I'll tell him to stay outside the bathroom while I go to the bathroom, and then when I come out, he's gone. Or, now I have to do all of the planning. And it's a little bit overwhelming. So we take all of that away from the caregivers, and we plan the entire trip. They just come and have a good time. And so this is the 5th year, so it's been very successful. Last year we did a 10-day cruise to Canada and New England, which was great. This year we're doing a little shorter cruise. We're going back to Bermuda on August the 3rd, so we're really excited that we can go somewhere a little warmer. So as a nonprofit, we are, how can you help? We're always looking certainly for volunteers to help with our programs, to attend a class. You can always sign up, certainly for our newsletters. And this is the information about our center. So I wanted to leave just a little bit of time for questions, and then if anybody wanted me to talk specifically about what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease, any of the warning signs, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have those. So does anybody have any questions? That's a great question. So if you have a family member who has had a brain injury, and there's already short-term memory loss, how do you know if it's gone into some type of dementia? And now I think the physicians are getting a lot better. We have a lot better testing in terms of really knowing what type of dementia it is, and oftentimes a brain injury can sort of bring on the disease that might have been underlying anyway. And so I think it's looking at, if I just have, what was the memory loss when the injury first happened, and maybe after some of that initial cognitive rehabilitation, and then what does it look like now? Because we see more and more individuals as they age, they do have that brain injury early in life, and now it's progressed into some type of dementia. And so we're always looking at how can we help that individual. So we do have a number of people in our program that do have brain injuries that need that cognitive stimulation. So that's a great question. Well, if they wanted to come in, certainly if they wanted to come in for a memory screening, that is free. And that way they would have kind of a baseline of where are they? And I think that's what you kind of have to look at. Otherwise, you could certainly go to the neurologist and they could see if, or a neuropsychologist, and they could see if it has progressed. And I think what's interesting is we always need to know the baseline of an individual. So an individual that might have a 7th grade education, their cognitive abilities are going to look a lot different than somebody that has a PhD. And we also take into account, are we giving the test in somebody's native language? Because again, as they're reverting back to speaking their native language, maybe they could answer the questions if I could just ask them in their native language. And so sometimes we have an adult child come just to translate the questions, to make that a little bit easier. So it's a great question. So the loss of memory, for individuals that are aging, again, dementia is not a normal part of aging. So as we age, like I said, we have a harder time coming up with names. We have a harder time multitasking. We might, have occasional forgetfulness, but it's not the same as dementia. And so dementia it's sort of an umbrella term that describes a group of symptoms that include memory loss. Okay. So I think, I think that is really important because we want to make sure that people understand that dementia is not a normal part of aging. And to be able to get the interventions early on is really important. And so, again, dementia describes this group of symptoms that affect cognition. So it's memory, it could be memory loss, it could be executive functioning, it could be reasoning, it could be verbal ability. And when we look at this umbrella, under that umbrella, there are over 96 different types of dementia. So we talk about sort of the major types of dementia. The first one is Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease makes up about 55 to 60% of all dementias. And Alzheimer's disease, the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease are the short-term memory loss. And so there are two abnormal proteins, the tau and the plaques and the tangles. And we need to have sort of both of those in our brain to be able to say that somebody has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. So currently, as I said, there's no cure, but we can now see if somebody has plaques and tangles in their brain with an amyloid PET scan. So unfortunately, Medicare does not cover that cost. Oftentimes, it's only available through research trials, and there are a number of research trials, specifically at Georgetown. There's a new program called Recognition Health that also has some research trials. But Alzheimer's disease is a slow, steady disease that as these plaques and tangles grow in our brain, eventually they affect the area of the brain that affects heart rate and breathing, and that's why people pass away from Alzheimer's disease. So we know Alzheimer's disease can last anywhere from 6 to 20 years. So it's varying, and we look at what's called. So a lot of the research that has been done on Alzheimer's disease, a lot of the drug trials have failed. So now what they're looking at is, what if we gave individuals the same medications early on? So these plaques and tangles are forming in a person's brain with Alzheimer's 15 to 20 years before the symptoms ever appear. So what we're looking at is before the age of 65, it's considered young onset Alzheimer's. And young onset Alzheimer's, there is a genetic factor that if you have 3 specific genes, the PS1, the PS2 are an APP gene, chances are good that you are going to have Alzheimer's disease. So you're looking at if a parent had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, was it before or after the age of 65? So after 65, there is a genetic component of Alzheimer's disease. And we're looking at it's called the APOE4 gene, and that's a risk factor. If you have that gene, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get Alzheimer's disease. Again, the number one risk factor for Alzheimer's disease really is age. And as people are living longer, and as all of those baby boomers start to turn 65, that's why we're seeing an increase in the number of people that have Alzheimer's disease. The second leading cause of dementia is what's called Lewy body dementia. And so Lewy body dementia encompasses both Parkinson's disease dementia as well as dementia with Lewy bodies. So Parkinson's disease dementia typically happens where you see some of the motor movements, where there's a lack of dopamine. Not every person with Parkinson's disease will develop dementia. Dementia with Lewy bodies, the hallmark of that disease are hallucinations, typically visual hallucinations of small children or animals. And The area of the brain that's affected is the area of the brain that produces the acetylcholine, which is the memory neurotransmitter. And so if the brain affects that area, people will have what's called Lewy bodies, which are abnormal proteins in their brain. There's a fluctuating cognition, and then oftentimes towards the middle stage of the disease, they start having the motor movements like somebody with Parkinson's disease. There's also something called vascular dementia, and vascular dementia happens because there's been a loss of blood flow to some part of our brain. So oftentimes if somebody has a stroke, or maybe a small mini stroke, and some area of their brain has been affected, oftentimes it's their temporal lobe, which affects language. So oftentimes somebody that has vascular dementia might have what we call aphasia, which is the inability to use or understand language. So vascular dementia looks a little bit different than Alzheimer's disease in that it looks like a stair step. I have a small stroke and then something else happens. Maybe I fall and break my hip and have to go into the hospital and undergo anesthesia. That might bump me back to another level of confusion. And then I sort of plateau, and then maybe I get a really bad urinary tract infection and it bumps me down to another level of confusion. So somebody with vascular dementia, they might stay, maybe they're just having a hard time coming up with names, or they're a little bit forgetful, and that it never progresses. My guess is that's vascular dementia. And then we look at the last type of dementia we really kind of focus on is what's called frontal temporal degeneration, which really is a disease of language, and behavior, sort of language dysfunction and behaviors, because it affects our frontal lobe, which is our executive functioning, our reasoning, our what we call our filter or our social graces. And then our temporal lobe, which is our language. And then deep in our temporal lobe is memory. And so oftentimes people with frontal temporal degeneration, their memory is okay. They just have a hard time understanding or using language. So we have a gentleman in our center who has FTD. He can understand what I'm saying to him, but when he talks, it sounds like garbled speech. But in his mind, he's speaking just like I'm speaking to you. And because he no longer has a frontal lobe, he gets more aggressive because he's frustrated that I'm not understanding what he's saying. So he might push me or hit me. Again, he no longer knows that that's not appropriate. So, so we teach a lot of classes at Insight that talk about how do we communicate with somebody with these different types of dementia? How do we handle their behaviors so we can set ourselves up for success as caregivers? And how do we set that person living with dementia up for success? Because somebody that's asking us the same question 20 times, it's not that they're trying to annoy us, it's that they really don't remember that they've asked me the same question just 2 seconds before. So that's kind of a brief overview of some of the different types of dementia. And then we're looking at, what are those warning signs? And they all look a little bit different for every person. So any other questions? So if we look at, the 150,000 people that are unpaid caregivers, so unpaid caregivers tend to be family caregivers or friends. A paid caregiver would be somebody like me who's getting paid to take care of somebody with dementia. But a lot of times, maybe families aren't able to afford a paid caregiver, which is why adult children might have to quit their job to take care of their parents. Or maybe a grandchild, puts their college career on hold to move in with grandma to take care of her. Those are the unpaid caregivers that I'm talking about. Most of us are unpaid caregivers. Is It's a great question. Any other questions? Well, sometimes we will cover it. So the reality is, there have been really no studies that have proven that supplements are effective in terms of sort of staving off dementia. But they could also be good for you, and if you feel that they're working, as long as they're not interacting with any medications, there's no reason that you should stop taking them. The only supplement that has been proven that it absolutely does not help is ginkgo biloba. That's the only one that in research they have said that does not help memory. But there's a lot of information out there now about coconut oil. There's been no research that has found that coconut oil actually improves your memory. But if it makes you feel better, if you feel like your body feels better taking it, there's no reason that you can't. And there's also a lot of I always see on the news, I think it's called Prevagen or some sort of supplement, that does not help in the long run. And so one of Melanie Chadwick, who is coming to talk at our boot camp, might be better able to, talk to you about sort of supplement use. Supplements are good, but not necessarily to help you stave off dementia. What does it cost? It depends on where we're going. So the trip to Bermuda, right. So the trip to Bermuda costs $2,000 a person, and that includes the cruise, that includes the transportation from Insight to the port, it includes all of the gratuities, the excursions, the respite that we provide. So I think it's reasonable. Right. And so I think it's really looking at, who can people afford that, and cruises are not cheap in general. But I think, again, for the individuals that are going, it's worth it to them to travel in a group, to know that you're with other individuals, and to have the support of me and my staff that come with. Any other questions? We do have a partnership with Brain Injury Services, and oftentimes, certainly, we kind of refer to each other. Mm-hmm. And any other questions? Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come out today. I have brought a number of flyers that talk about different types of dementia, the warning signs, just an overview of Insight, our classes, all of our support groups. Information about our boot camp on April the 6th. And so, and I certainly, also our memory screenings. If you're not able to come on the 27th from 12 to 3 to have your memory screened, you can always give us a call, and we'd be happy to have you come to Insight, and we would be happy to give you a memory screening there. And if you ever want to see what Insight looks like, I certainly encourage you to stop by our center. And again, I appreciate you coming out today to learn a little bit more about our program. And I'm supposed to just remind you to please help with the chairs. I was told you guys know where they go. So thank you all very much.